This is Land of Havilah, 1 Kings 20b. Ben-Hadad, king of Syria, thinks he lost because Yahweh's the God of the hills. Therefore, he's planning to re-engage Ahab, but this time on the plain. Verse 26. At the return of the year, Ben-Hadad mustered the Syrians and went up to Aphek to fight against Israel. Comment: This is setting up just like the nameless prophet said it would, at the return of the year, meaning at the beginning of the calendar year. The location of Aphek is unknown except that it's on a plain. Verse 27. The children of Israel were mustered and given provisions, and went against them. The children of Israel encamped before them like two little flocks of young goats, but the Syrians filled the country. Comment: Both armies are encamped on the plain. It doesn't look like Israel has a chance. Their army is very small. Now Yahweh is going to encourage Ahab by another nameless prophet. Verse 28. A man of God came near and spoke to the king of Israel and said, Yahweh says, because the Syrians have said Yahweh is a God of the hills, but he is not a God of the valleys, therefore I will deliver all this great multitude into your hand, and you shall know that I am Yahweh. They encamped opposite each other for 7 days. Comment: For 7 days the armies camped, preparing for battle, and it was a test of nerves and faith for the small Israelite army. But Yahweh said the victory is yours. Yahweh's aim at the altar of Baal was that, quote, this people may know that you, Yahweh, are God, end quote. His aim during the battle of Samaria was that, quote, you will know that I am Yahweh, end quote. His aim now at this battle again is that, quote, you shall know that I am Yahweh, end quote. Each time Yahweh has said by the prophets that he would accomplish the impossible, and so far he's 2 for 3. Ahab is without excuse if he won't learn. Still in verse 29. So it was that in the 7th day the battle was joined, and the children of Israel killed 100,000 footmen of the Syrians in 1 day. But the rest fled to Aphek into the city, and the wall fell on 27,000 men who were left. Ben-Hadad fled and came into the city into an inner room. Comment: There were 2 miracles right there. Number 1, massive victory. Number 2, the wall of Aphek fell on 27,000 Syrians who took refuge in the city. But not on Ben-Hadad. He's hiding in an inner room. Verse 31. His servants said to him, See now, we have heard that the kings of the house of Israel are merciful kings. Please let us put sackcloth on our bodies and ropes on our heads and go out to the king of Israel. Maybe he will save your life. So they put sackcloth on their bodies and ropes on their heads and came to the king of Israel and said, Your servant Ben-Hadad says, Please let me live. Comment: Ben-Hadad says through his representatives, Let me live and I'll be your servant. In other words, he's offering to be Ahab's vassal king. What will be Ahab's response? Still in verse 32. He said, Is he still alive? He is my brother. Comment: In response, Ahab elevated Ben-Hadad from servant to brother. Verse 33. Now the men observed diligently and hurried to take this phrase, and they said, Your brother Ben-Hadad. Then he said, Go, bring him. Then Ben-Hadad came out to him, and he caused him to come up into the chariot. Ben-Hadad said to him, The cities which my father took from your father I will restore. You shall make streets for yourself in Damascus, as my father made in Samaria. Comment: Ahab called Ben-Hadad his brother and lifted him up into the chariot. But Ahab made no promises so far. Therefore Ben-Hadad began to offer terms of peace. He offered to give back certain cities that Syria took from Israel in the past. And he said Ahab could set up streets for himself in Damascus, which has been interpreted that he could construct bazaars or merchant booths on the streets of Damascus. It's a trade agreement. Still in verse 34. I, said Ahab, will let you go with this covenant. So he made a covenant with him and let him go. Comment: Ahab was merciful. Did he do the right thing? By modern standards, by the Geneva Convention, if a combatant surrenders, he shouldn't be killed. And if we should take a poll of Americans today, no doubt they would overwhelmingly say that Ahab did the right thing by showing mercy to Ben-Hadad. However, we do remember as recently as the 1940s that the Allies put Nazi war criminals on trial and executed a number of them. And we remember that the Iraqi government put Saddam Hussein on trial for war crimes and hanged him in 2006. There's a point of confusion here about Christian love and mercy, so let's be clear. If one individual sins against another, the offended has the power to forgive. For example, if someone steals from me, I can forgive, and I'm under no obligation to report the crime to the authorities. But there's a very different case, for example, if I see someone stealing from my neighbor. I have no power to forgive that because the crime isn't against me. I'm obligated to report it. Similarly, there's a clear distinction between crimes committed against individuals and crimes against societies. Crimes against societies must be brought to justice according to the law. Ahab should have been enforcing the law of the land, which was the law of Moses. According to that, if a nation makes war against Israel and Yahweh gives Israel victory, then Israel should, quote, strike every male with the edge of the sword, Deuteronomy 20, verse 13. But Ahab let Ben-Hadad go free. Verse 35. A certain man of the sons of the prophets said to his fellow by Yahweh's word, Please strike me. The man refused to strike him. Comment. In the case of Ahab, Yahweh told him to strike, but he didn't. At least he told him through the law to strike. Now a prophet by Yahweh's command is telling someone, strike me, but his companion won't strike because he's thinking to himself, it's not right to strike anyone. But if Yahweh says to strike, we strike. Verse 36. Then he said to him, Because you have not obeyed Yahweh's voice, behold, as soon as you have departed from me, a lion will kill you. As soon as he had departed from him, a lion found him and killed him. Then he found another man and said, Please strike me. The man struck him and wounded him. Comment. The prophet found another man, meaning this second man wasn't present during the first incident. When the prophet said, Strike me, the second man figured, I don't want to strike him, but he's a prophet. Therefore, in obedience to Yahweh, I'm going to strike. So he struck hard enough to leave a wound. Verse 38. So the prophet departed and waited for the king by the way, and disguised himself with his headband over his eyes. As the king passed by, he cried to the king, and he said, Your servant went out into the middle of the battle, and behold, a man came over and brought a man to me, and said, Guard this man. If by any means he is missing, then your life shall be for his life, or else you shall pay a talent of silver. As your servant was busy here and there, he was gone. Comment. The prophet met the king by the way, which means on a road. He says he was one of the soldiers on the battlefield, and he admits that out of negligence he let a prisoner escape. Still in verse 40. The king of Israel said to him, So shall your judgment be. You yourself have decided it. Comment. That wasn't a difficult decision for the king. Obviously, the man shouldn't have let his prisoner escape. He says, You yourself have decided it, meaning you knew the right thing and you didn't do it. Verse 41. He hurried and took the headband away from his eyes, and the king of Israel recognized that he was one of the prophets. He said to him, Yahweh says, Because you have let go out of your hand the man whom I had devoted to destruction, therefore your life will take the place of his life, and your people take the place of his people. Comment. It's clear that Yahweh has condemned Ahab to death for failing to kill Ben-Hadad. This drives home the point that we must stand up for societal and international justice to punish evildoers according to the law. We have no option. When it's our option to forgive, we can and should forgive. But when forgiveness is not an option, we can't let criminals off the hook. That would be evil. Let's be careful whom we pardon. It's not precisely clear what Yahweh means when he says, Your people will take the place of his people, but clearly the people of Israel will suffer. Verse 43. The king of Israel went to his house, sullen and angry, and came to Samaria. Comment. Ahab's home from the battle. He's victorious, but there's nothing to celebrate. Quote, For what shall it profit a man if he shall gain the whole world and lose his soul? Mark 8:36. Ahab had 3 chances to know that Yahweh was God, but none of Yahweh's outreaches have made any impression, so Ahab's condemned. Back in verse 31, Ben-Hadad's advisors said that they had heard that the kings of Israel were merciful kings, and that wasn't necessarily a good reputation. They should rather have heard that the kings of Israel exact justice. Now, by refusing to exact justice, Ahab's only inviting more war, maybe even with Ben-Hadad. This is the same man who approached Ahab in Samaria and said, Your silver and your gold, your wives and your children are mine. Evil doesn't fight fair. If we're a friend and brother of it, it will come back to bite us. When we have the upper hand, we should press the cause of righteousness. 1 Kings 21 is next at landofhavilah.net. 1 Kings 21. This is the map of 1 Kings 20. This is Damascus, capital of Syria, and 100 miles away, Samaria, capital of Israel. The battlefield location of Aphek is unknown. 1 Kings 21 is next.